One of the things that trials do is reveal where your life is built on faulty foundations. You see, for many people, that thing that they build their whole lives on is money. Trials, James explains, reveal what you really believe about God and how much you trust Him. Trials show what your faith is really made of. You can talk a big spiritual game all day long, but trials show where your faith really lies. These defining moments they're never fun, but they play an important role in your life. A defining moment is when something becomes real to you. It goes from talk to something that is real to you in terms of relationship. I got a friend whose middle school son was having some behavioral issues. And this dad tried everything he knew to get his son's attention and to bring his son's behavior in line. But none of his lectures or punishments, none of them seemed to work. Middle school parents, you know exactly what we're talking about. No matter how eloquent and how awesome the lesson, the kid just wasn't listening. Well, this guy is also a pilot, so we decided to take his son up on an airplane ride and just use that different perspective, on the world from 10,000 feet to talk to his son about the need to grow up, the need to have perspective, make better decisions. This dad discovered that these high altitude conversations, they just put his son in a different frame of mind. And after they returned, his son was always much more cooperative and respectful. So whenever his son's behavior began to deteriorate, he'd take him up in the plane, he'd look him in the eye, he would tell him what was expected of him as a young man. Well, having a middle school student of my own, a middle school son, I was so intrigued by this. I asked him if I could accompany him on one of these rides to see how it worked, what he said. I snapped this picture, which might explain why the technique was so successful, okay? Just kidding, all right? That is not a real picture. But a trial is a defining moment where God looks you in the eye and says to you, do you actually trust me? Do you actually trust me? What are you really leaning the weight of your life on? James continues his counsel about persevering through trials in verse 9, where we're going to be today, by giving us more perspective and then giving us a very important warning. Listen, okay? Trials and suffering are the hardest part of the Christian life. Nobody enjoys it. Trials often leave you wondering if you've done something wrong or why God doesn't seem to care. You're like, God, what about me? What about me? I just want a good marriage. I just want to have kids. You've given me this desire for mothering. Why can't I have kids? Or maybe it's like, God, I just want to feel good. I just want to be healthy and strong. There are so many things that I want to do in life for other people. I want to serve other people and I can't when I feel like this. Or I just want to have a little financial stability, a little bit of freedom. Or maybe it's something like, I just want my mom to be well. Or I just want my parents to be together and not get divorced. God, what about me? James was no stranger to suffering, nor was his audience. These people have been unjustly driven away from their homeland. But James wants them and you and me to know that God is up to something good in these trials. And again, today, he is going to give you a new perspective. He's going to say, number one, that trials reveal our false foundations. That's going to be the first 4 verses we look at. And then he's going to give us a very dire warning, and that is, number 2, beware the deadly off-ramp of sin. That's the next 6 verses. Let's look at those one at a time. Number 1, trials reveal false foundations. Here's what James says in verse 9. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and let the rich in his humiliation. Because like a flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass. Its flower falls and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. One of the things that trials do is reveal where your life is built on faulty foundations. You see, for many people, that thing that they build their whole lives on is money. Getting it, saving it, keeping it, and that will not endure. So James tells the rich, those who have a lot of money, he says, rejoice in the humiliation that your trial brings. And by humiliation, by the way, he just means when things happen to you that your money is not able to protect you from. He says, rejoice in those things because that is helping you see that money is no foundation to build your life on. During the COVID pandemic, I told you the story of a lumberjack who was preparing to cut down several trees in a mountain forest. And just before he began, he noticed a beautiful bird that was building its nest atop one of the trees. Well, not wanting to harm the bird or its young, the lumberjack took a mallet. Before he got out his saw, he took a mallet and he began to pound on the base of the tree until the bird, quite annoyed, flew away to another tree to begin to build its nest there. But the lumberjack was planning also to cut down that tree, so he repeated the process with the mallet and that tree. And so the bird moved to a third tree, which the lumberjack was also planning to cut down, so he did it again. The bird and the lumberjack repeated this dance a half dozen or so times until the bird abandoned the forest altogether and built its nest on the side of a rock face. Now, I imagine the bird never understood why the lumberjack was attacking each tree he attempted to build his nest in, but the lumberjack's motive was not meanness, it was compassion. The lumberjack knew that every tree in the forest was about to come down, and he wanted the bird to build its nest in a place that his axes could not touch. Well, see, that's what God does with us in trials. God reveals those places to us that we have put our confidence that will not sustain us. For most people, again, they base their whole lives on the premise that money is security. Money is significance. Money is beauty. Money is enjoyment. And if you got money, you can obtain all of those things, all the good things you want in life, and you can protect yourself from the bad things that you don't want to happen. And if you don't have money, well, then you're powerless. You know, it's helpful to consider that in James's day, the line between the haves and the have-nots was really stark. The wealthy tended to be crazy wealthy. They owned all the land, they had seemingly infinite resources, and the poor, they just worked the land that the rich owned. They were like sharecroppers. This meant that the poor had almost no possibility of upward mobility. If you were poor, most likely you would be poor forever. The result was that you had two very distinct classes in first century society. The rich felt invulnerable and the poor felt helpless. But trials comes, James says, trials come to the rich and the poor alike, and they reveal that the rich are not really that invulnerable. There is nothing like a disease diagnosis or divorce papers or a dissolving relationship that will show you how powerless your money actually is. Pastor Brian tells a story of several years ago being on a plane when one of the engines went out. Now, I can tell you in all the flights that I've ever been on, that has never happened to me, and I hope it never does. He says it is one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. He said, we heard this loud boom, and I saw smoke coming out of the engine at about 8,000 feet in the air, followed, he said, by an eerie silence. That's the last thing, he says, you want to hear at a plane, a loud boom and then an eerie silence. Brian said, but then all of a sudden, something beautiful happened. All of us spontaneously began to reach across the aisle and held each other's hands and started praying together. Blacks prayed with whites, Asians prayed with Hispanics. There was no first class or economy comfort. In fact, if you were in the front of the plane, it just meant that you were going to be the first to die if it went down. He said, in that moment, we were classless, a bunch of people in the same predicament. Nobody cared who was sitting where or what kind of watch that was on your wrist. We were all uniquely aware of our own mortality, and in those moments, class did not matter. Well, see, that's what a trial does, James explains. It reveals weakness. In a trial, he says, all your riches are useless to stop disease or death or divorce. All flesh, rich or poor, is just grass. A couple of hot weeks with no rain and the rich fade away as easily as the poor. It doesn't matter if you're a hydrangea or a dandelion. Sun comes out, and if you don't get any water, you all end up the exact same way. Truth be told, not only is money unable to save you in the day of death, it also won't really satisfy you now. Trials reveal that also. I mean, maybe you're here this morning and you are financially comfortable. You got every kind of insurance, every kind of convenience you can have, but now you're going through a divorce and you're seeing that all that money was unable to build you a stable home. You can't get insurance on that. Or you got a kid who's wandering that you're really worried about. Or you just got a bad report from the doctor and all your money cannot remove the tumors. Or maybe after all you've obtained, you still feel unsatisfied and empty. I heard Tony Evans say this recently: money can buy a bed but not sleep, books but not brains, food but not appetite, finery but not beauty, a house but not a home, medicine but not health, luxuries but not culture, amusements but not happiness, religion but not salvation. Money can get you a passport to everywhere except heaven. So again, James tells the rich, rejoice in your humiliation because it is keeping you from building your lives on false foundations. Before I discuss the flip side of this, what James says about the poor, don't just think about this in terms of being financially rich. Anything you're rich in, you are likely to start trusting in that. Some of you, for example, are rich in popularity. You may not have that much money, but maybe you're in high school, you're in college, whatever, but you're rich in popularity. The result is that your identity is built on people liking you. If so, if that's you, you should rejoice when other people don't speak well of you, when you're not roundly praised, when you don't get invited to the party. Because only then will you see whether you've built your foundation on what God thinks about you. If I'm used to being roundly praised for my gifts, it's only when that's not there that I can consider, all right, how weighty is God's approval actually? How weighty is that actually to me? I mean, for example, I love when people write me encouraging notes here at the church and say that God has used me in their lives, that they enjoy my preaching, whatever. But I'll tell you, when I look back, it's been those seasons where those notes weren't really coming, when I was really being criticized, that I had to consider whose opinion really matters to me. Is it yours or is it God's? Is my identity built on his approval or is it built on yours? By the way, I'm not asking you to write me critical notes to help me grow in my sanctification, just to be clear, okay? I'm only saying that when trial and humiliation comes, which it always does, then and only then am I forced to consider what the real foundations of my life are. For those of you who are rich in anything, trials reveal false foundations.